back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are definitely into a baseball season here. Man, we had everything going on at the same time, right? I mean, it's like baseball and opening day, and the Orioles are playing, and the Masters is going, and the weather is nice, and even WrestleMania, which I didn't know it was 2 nights of WrestleMania until Saturday night. Bianca Belair shows up all over my timeline. I think Facebook knows things from YouTube, Luke Jones. But Luke Jones joins us now. He spent dare I say, a lost weekend at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, but I know you look at it differently, especially after having the season taken away last year. When it's 9-1 on Sunday, on Master Sunday, and I've got a vacuum because my wife is coming home and things are happening, and it becomes tough sledding at 9-1. It really does.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, you can't look at what happened over the weekend other than the fact that we had nice weather. I mean, a beautiful Saturday, April evening for baseball, a beautiful Sunday afternoon. Opening day, the weather was nice. But the baseball itself, not so nice for the Orioles, who, after the opening weekend where they get the sweep in Boston, and I know you had a chance to talk to some Red Sox reporters, and the sky was falling there, and talk of them being, fourth fiddle in Boston? Well, they haven't lost since then, and the Orioles have lost 5 of 6 since then. So not that I'm saying the Red Sox are this juggernaut, but I think it's a reminder of that we all need at the beginning of baseball season, small sample size, knowing that even the worst teams in the league are going to play well at times. The best teams in the league are going to play not so well at times. But for the Orioles, a disappointing way to start the home schedule, a disappointing way where you're welcoming back a limited number of fans. Just not a whole lot of positive to take away from the weekend. A few individual accomplishments here and there. Trey Mancini hit his first couple home runs since defeating cancer. That was a great feel-good moment on Saturday night. But overall, there are a few individuals that you're really excited to see what they've been doing. And we've mentioned Cedric Mullins, and Bruce Zimmerman had another nice start over the weekend. But by and large, not a whole lot of positive to take away when you're going player by player on this 26-man roster right now. And it reflects in the fact that they started 3-0, and now, they're back below 500 as they're, going to finish up this homestand now against Seattle.
Well, Luke, I've put a lot of thought into this and ate a lot of fried chicken from Royal Farms while I did. As a matter of fact, I went on a milk run on Monday morning. Thank you, Rofo. I appreciate you. The gas as well. And I see the little Rofo on the back of the mound, right? And the logo, which probably made me hungry for fried chicken subliminally. I've watched a lot of baseball, enough to see the Wise Market sleeves on Sunday and enough to hear Jim Palmer mention my cousin's name. Thank you, Cakes. Appreciate you. Enough to see Jim outraged when, the pitcher's blocking home plate. It's a pitcher, not a catcher. And dude, I've watched 40 hours of baseball in the last, week and a half. I've given it the college effort, you know what I mean? Enough to stare out the window and see people still in 4 hours into the game on Sunday and say, I wonder if Ben McDonald's nephew's still in there pitching, right? Look, man, I went through this with Duquette. I went through this with McPhail and rebuilds and reinstalls, and we're going to sign Kevin Millwood. We're, all of that, right? Matt Harvey's going to pitch now. What is the philosophy on the pitching thing other than they're going to get their brains beaten in? They got these Rule 5 kids. What are they really trying to do here? Are they just trying to eat innings and deal Matt Harvey for a bucket of Delaware River Valley? I really don't know philosophically. I'm a week into this, and I'm like, you've had your whole life to think about pitching, and this is what you've given me? Really?
It's a rebuild. And you just said you've been through rebuilds. You haven't. Part of the issue is they haven't really done this properly going back to the late 90s.
Oh, that's right. They suck trying.
Correct. They kind of half did it.
Remember when they bought every middle reliever? Remember that?
Of course. And look, let's be very clear.
That was their money ball.
we know what the deal is right now. They're not trying to win at the major league level. Mike Elias has basically said as much. It's obvious. Look at where their payroll is right now. I'm not saying under normal times they have a $200 million payroll. We understand that, but they certainly had a period of time 5-6 years ago where their payroll was at least in the top third, at least for a short period of time. And now it's, right at the bottom, in bottom 2, 3, wherever it is. But as far as the pitching goes, could they have added another veteran or two? Yes. At the same time, I think you do look at where Mike Bauman is, where Zach Lowther is, where Alex Wells is, where Keegan Aiken is now back at the alternate training site after having a rough spring. Those are all guys who didn't get to pitch last year in the way that they needed to. And look, all 30 teams are dealing with that, right? I mean, the pandemic has impacted every team. When you're talking about
1,000 pitchers trying to do this for a living, right?
Right. So it's a challenge in the sense of going from 60 games in an abbreviated weird season to now going back to 162, trying to plan for that from a long-term standpoint. I mean, they have a 14-man pitching staff right now, and you're seeing that a lot around baseball, 13, 14. I mean, it's not 11 or 12 anymore. It's now, went from 11 to 12, now 12 or 13, now 13 or 14. I mean, that's where we are. And, they're just at a point where some of their top pitching talent, and I mentioned kind of the next wave of guys, but we know Grayson Rodriguez and DL Hall are the top flight guys, top tier pitching prospects. They lost a year last year. And I think whether you're Mike Elias or whether you're Brian Cashman or, any GM in baseball, you're trying to figure out the best way to do this to protect your investments in major league guys that are making 7 figures, 8 figures, or talking about your pitching prospects who maybe got some alternate training site work last year. Again, Orioles or whoever. So they're all trying to figure this out. But as we know, the Orioles aren't built right now to contend at the major league level. They're not trying to contend at the major league level. They're into year 3 of this thing at this point, and the second year was an abbreviated, weird 60-game schedule that they played kind of sort of well for 2/3 of it. Long story short, I mean they're not good. I mean their pitching is terrible at the major league level, and you kind of look at where they are right now. You have John Means, who has established himself at least as a major league pitcher, whether he's an ace, whether he's number 3, whether he's ultimately a number 5 on a contending staff. He at least proven
the baseball every
right. Exactly. Bruce Zimmerman has looked. He has 2 of their 3 quality starts thus far. He pitched pretty darn well on Saturday night, despite a rundown that was botched that didn't help him, despite a couple bad 2-strike pitches to Rafael Devers, which who ate them up on Sunday as well. So. But beyond that, and you mentioned Matt Harvey. Matt Harvey has pitched better than his statistics actually look. If you look at the bullpen coming in and not helping him out whatsoever, he's been okay at least. But again, the objective is not for this team to win as many games as possible at the major league level. They're trying to evaluate, and frankly, they're trying to not really worry about winning a whole lot, because if that means they can net another top 3 draft pick in 2022, well, then Mike Elias views that as a long-term gain. So we can agree or disagree with that as far as how much effort you put in at the major league.
It really is amazing how we're supposed to shine up a tank season. You know what I mean? This far down the line, it's very. I mean, this is point counterpoint.
It's not that far down the line, though.
Saturday Night Live from Jane Curtin from a million years ago. I can't. I mean, we're 10 days into it and giving it 4 hours a night every night. It's sort of background music at this point. But then there's sort of the fundamental things of how to do a rundown and how many outs there are. Stuff that my dad, if he were to come back from Gardens of Faith, right over by the Y's in Fullerton, he would say, that's effing Little League, man. You know what I mean? There's some stuff going on that when you watch it, I mean, Palmer and Garceau are scratching their heads, and we're all scratching our heads and saying it's not very good.
Yeah, although forgetting the outs, the Red Sox did that over the weekend. So, I mean, if we're going to start looking at this, maybe it's a fundamental thing across baseball, certain aspects of it, despite the overwhelming talent that we see in Major League Baseball, which is just extraordinary, which is part of the reason why we see the game play the way it is when you have pitchers throwing 100 miles per hour and have breaking balls that are like witches and wizards out there on the mound and what have you. But look.
Well, Santander, when he fell off 8 in a row on Sunday like that,
right,
and then struck out
yeah,
anyway, right? So,
well, I mean, some of that happens. I mean, some of that is the game today. But when you talk about the Orioles,
the bases loaded, they had a chance. They were,
sure,
it was what it was. So
right. But I mean, getting back to you mentioned something that we're far enough down the road with this. Are we though? I mean, part of the issue is Dan Duquette and Buck Showalter and the previous regime took this thing to. I mean, you think about a car being on empty, right? And they pushed for the last 40 or 50 miles on empty to try to contend one last time in 2018. And it blew up in their faces and they lost 115 games anyway. And they had to trade Manny Machado as a rental rather than a player who had a year and a half left of service time. I mean, so much of what Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal...
Philosophically, he wouldn't let them sign international ball play. It was a philosophical issue from the old man. I mean, that, like all of this roots to the old man. I'm never going to let anybody put it anywhere else. I mean, Chris Davis is about the old man. It's not about John Angelos or Dan Duquette or Buck Showalter or Brandon Hyde or Mike Elias. I mean, I get the sins, but this is a summer where like the sun is shining and there's a million things to do besides watch a team go down and not know how many outs there are and not play fundamental baseball. And behind it all say they're not even trying to win. Well, maybe the part of that where like Ken Singleton says to me, well, the fun in it would be like when the Red Sox are in, you get to go see JD Martinez hit double-A pitching. You know what I mean? Like there is a little part of that the visiting teams that come in here, you want to see Mike Trout play. So you circle that or whatever it would be, Ohtani pitch or hit, right? I just on a nightly basis as an Oriole fan investing in this as they meander into game, whenever they're 38 and 68 or whatever that's going to be, I'm trying to envision how I stay with Ryan Mountcastle and Trey Mancini and a couple of these players that look like they might be players and guys I'm rooting for at this point, quite frankly.
Well, you just said it. And I've said this over and over the last 2 or 3 years now. It comes down to the individual investment in players that you think have a chance to be part of the future, or a player like Trey Mancini, who at age 29 might not be part of the next contending club, but at some point in the next year and a half, maybe they deal him to a contender and he gets a chance to go win somewhere and the Orioles get a couple nice pieces. Maybe they extend Trey Mancini. I'm not saying I can tell the future there, but my point is guys like him, guys like Anthony Santander, where they have talent in the outfield and more coming on the way over the next couple of years. Maybe he's a guy you deal for an infield prospect, which is something they're lacking right now, as far as, at the higher levels of the major leagues or at the minor leagues. So it really is
those. I remember when they almost gave Jonathan Scope $90 million. Remember that?
Yeah, I mean, and what's funny is you've seen Jonathan Scope bounced around a little bit since he's left the Orioles, which is kind of, it kind of speaks to how strange the game has become in ways of how you evaluate players. Like guys that are good players, but they have just enough flaws where teams don't want to invest in them long term. And we see that on the free agent market year after year. That's why for every Mookie Betts or Nolan Arenado or Fernando Tatis or Manny Machado, there are how many guys who aren't that caliber player, but are still pretty good. They're getting 1-year deals. They're getting 1-year deals with a club option. They're getting mutual option deals. They're getting underwhelming money. I mean, we've talked about the economic side a lot.
Well, you talk about 14 pitchers as well. Underneath the 14 pitchers is we won't have any more Strasburgs going 7 2/3. That generation's gone, and that'll take the value away from the starting pitchers. We won't have to pay pitchers whose arms are brittle $35 million a year. I mean, the Verlanders. This is the senior class. Once they graduate, we're gonna bring this thing in and have pitcher by committee, which will save us money, and we'll stop this closer nonsense where we got to give Tom Henke $6.4 million, right?
Well, I don't know if you see those types of pitchers disappear. I mean, Trevor Bauer would, you see the money he got from the Dodgers over the offseason, he would beg to differ.
Instead of being the 50 guys getting that kind of money, there might only be 12.
Right, exactly. You just said it. It's really, and we've talked about this for years now, over the course of this current CBA and the luxury tax threshold. The middle class of veteran free agents has disappeared. I mean, you have the elite upper class that are they're still getting insane money. And then you have teams that are valuing their prospects and club control players, guys that are pre-arbitration or just entering arbitration. And you don't see as many of those players dealt. I mean, I think the Orioles are a great example of this, of, even Manny Machado, despite the fact that he was a rental, they got a couple nice minor league pieces, but they didn't get a franchise-altering, insane return that I bet if they had traded someone like Manny Machado 10 years earlier, that minor league haul would have been way different than it was
or a
now.
year earlier in there.
Well, sure, but I'm talking like even from a rental standpoint, a rental 10 years ago would have fetched you more than it does now.
Well, I mean, I always think about like the Adam Jones scenario. He's over playing in Japan, eating steak, having a good time.
Sure.
Adam Jones 10 years ago thought, if I'm still a strappy 36, 37-year-old guy that can play a little bit and hit 280 and hit 22 bombs and be a good team guy and a good community guy and, I'm a guy you want around, I'll make $6-8 million. Like I'll be worth that kind of money. They all thought that. And then now you're 32 and they don't want anything to do with you anymore. You become kryptonite because you're too expensive. And they let you got a 1-year deal. It's $2 million if you want it. If you don't want it, go play in Japan or whatever. Right.
Exactly. So that's where, that's where things have changed, but bringing it back to the Orioles, again, it's the investment in seeing individual success. Right now, we've talked about it. We'll continue to talk about it because of how well he's played. Cedric Mullins is a really good story. When you kind of think of the fact that he's called up in 2018, they move Adam Jones to right field. You just mentioned Adam Jones. Adam gives him the blessing. He's someone that Mullins has talked about it, continues to keep in touch with Adam Jones 3 years later. So they have a relationship, but he's the heir apparent in center field. He starts out, 6 for 60 or whatever it was at the beginning of 2019. They send him down. He struggles at AAA Norfolk. He's all the way in Bowie the second half of 2019. Comes up in the pandemic here, plays pretty well. Nothing out of the extraordinary, but he played well, got himself back on the radar, so to speak, of being a major league player, whether it's going to be a starting center fielder, fourth outfielder, what have you. He abandoned switch hitting over the offseason, which I know Matt Wieters at times was asked about this. I know Brian Roberts commented on it during one of the Masson telecasts at some point over the last year. Abandoning switch hitting and suddenly saying you're going to face left-handed pitching as a left-handed batter or right-handed pitching as a righty hitter. That's incredibly difficult. That you've never seen a breaking ball that's coming at your head before it snaps in over the strike zone. That's just something a switch hitter has never had to envision. Cedric Mullins already has as many hits against left-handed pitching this year as he did last year as a right-handed hitter against lefties. That's impressive. And I know it's a small sample, but it speaks to someone who has made improvements, someone who has worked on it. No question about it.
He read Astro Ball.
Yeah, and look, I'm not even sure it's some magical scientific technology-based discovery of his. It was very simple. He was a switch hitter who always swung the bat better from the left side, which isn't atypical, but he had struggled so much from the right side at every level, not just at the major leagues, but going back to the early levels of the minors, that you get to a point where you say, is this really worth it to spend time perfecting and tweaking two different swings when I've never shown the ability to be remotely productive or consistent from the right side? Why not just focus on the left side? And hey, that might mean you're a platoon player, which right now it's looking like he's an everyday player. He's been an everyday player, he's played very well. He's been their best player so far this year, position player wise. But you kind of look at it from the standpoint of, if I can just hone and perfect and tweak that swing from the left side, even if I don't hit left-handed pitching at a high clip, and look, I don't think he's going to, I think he's batting over 500 against left-handed pitching over the first week of the season. Clearly, that's not going to continue. But the point is, he's taken something that he did well, and he's focusing on that. In the same way that one thing that analytics has done that's been great for pitching is it's really broken down splits, not to the point of just, well, you're good against right-handed pitcher or hitters, you're good against lefties, whatever. They break it down to the point of, wow, you know what, we see what kind of movement you get on your breaking ball whether it's your curve, your slider, whatever, or we see what kind of swing and miss numbers you have with your changeup, you should throw that pitch more. And you get all this data where guys can kind of hone in on what they do best and then dwell on that a little bit more. I mean, that was something that was done with John Means. John Means was a fringe organizational minor league pitcher.
Well, they would say that about Keuchel in Houston, right? I mean, that's the story.
Yeah.
And I think having read Astro Ball and now come 2-3 years out, we shouldn't. I mean, look, it's not like Elias and Meidel are geniuses or whatever they are, but they do know what they're doing, and they do have these techniques they employ, right? And it's new world, new age, and some guys are going to get it and catch on, and we're seeing the fruit of that, right? I mean, I don't know the names of the guys that they dealt off at the low level and the coaches that they got rid of. We do know some of the coaches they got rid of, right, who were not buying into the system. But if you buy into the system, they'll get a couple of victories, right? And that's what these are, at least in small increments for now.
Yeah, and I mean, and you mentioned the coaches. I mean, a lot of that isn't even that coaches don't buy in. Sometimes it's a matter of you're using certain technologies, whether it's Rapsodo, the high-speed cameras and TrackMan and all the different, we've heard the buzzwords if you've tried to pay attention to what we're kind of seeing with this science technology-based breakthrough into player development. But it's also hiring people who already have a competency with it. I mean, it's one thing you can talk about training someone who might not have as much desire, or maybe they're a little more reluctant, or they might just not get it, as you mentioned, or you bring in people.
An old fart like me trying to hang on to old things, right? I mean, that's the thing.
Sure, but there have also been guys who've adapted, and you can find that around baseball. I mean, you can find managers who've been around a long time, and they're very well versed. Jim Palmer, you hear it on the telecast. Jim understands what they're doing from a technology standpoint. Now, he might not buy everything as a 100% gospel and truth, and he might question certain things, but he talked about it. I mean, he talked about it the first week of the season, this idea of spin rate. The pitchers have talked about putting spin on the ball in late life, and, you get that fastball that has almost that optical illusion of some rising action as it gets closer to home plate. Those are ideas that have been around for decades. It's just now we have the technology to quantify that. We have pitchers who have ways to, and pitching coaches who have ways to teach guys to put a little more spin on the ball. Now, certainly you veer into questions as far as the ball and guys that are doing things to the ball. And, I mean, there's been talk about that. And look, I mean,
stick them on the baseball. I've seen that.
You watched Gaylord Perry decades ago doing stuff to the baseball. So, I mean, pitchers have been putting stuff on the baseball for as long as there have been pitchers in baseballs. I mean, that's just the way it is. But
they don't really put it on the baseball. They put it on the hat or the,
Sure. I mean,
I saw Major League.
It's the fingers getting a better grip. And by the way, guys like Buck Showalter have actually advocated having a stickier baseball because you can control it better. And guess what? That puts hitters in less danger. So just keep that in mind as well as you hear hand-wringing about some of those topics over the last few years. But getting back to
like Ben McDonald's nephew hitting the kid with the bases loaded, but keep going.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Rule 5 kid who's in over his head, hasn't pitched above single A before this year. I mean, it is what it is when you're talking about Rule 5 guys.
But a better grip on the baseball would probably help the perspiration.
Oh, no question. Especially when you're talking about April nights where it can get a little chilly, or September nights when it's chillier. I mean, that's just the way it is. But as coming back to the Orioles, I mean, I said, and I even wrote this at BaltimorePositive.com at the time. I picked roughly 10 or 11 guys that are on the 26-man roster right now. And that's honestly being kind. But 10 or 11 guys that I saw on the roster right now that I would say, you know what? They have a chance to be part of the next contending club. And whenever it is, 2 years, 3 years, whenever it is, they have a chance to stick. And that doesn't mean they're going to be the star, but they have something in their skill set, or they're at a position where maybe they don't have as much minor league depth. They have a chance to stick. And those are the guys that I'm going to be watching most closely. I mean, so on a nightly basis, they're going to lose.
In a position like that, that's where we are, right? Like you cover the team, you're there every day. That's kind of trying to find the pieces of you writing the Astro Ball story 5 years from now if they happen to win.
Yeah, and I mean, you said it. There's no guarantee that this is going to work. There's never a guarantee when it's going to work. And by the way, they also had times, as we mentioned, go back to the early 2000s, and we can all remember them signing Javi Lopez and Rafael Palmeiro and Miguel Tejada and re-signing Sidney Ponson after they had traded him to the Giants.
And just for a good
yeah,
measure. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can do that, and you can spend a bunch of money, and guess what? That team, those teams of that era that were not all that terribly cheap, what was their ceiling? Maybe if everything worked perfectly, maybe they could have won 85 games if you catch lightning in a bottle. That's not a plan. I'm not saying this is the only way to do it either, but there is a plan. Mike Elias said from day one, this is going to take some time. He never lied to anyone about that. There've never been false promises from him. Now you can talk about the family and ownership and the history of that and points that you made a little bit earlier. And you're right. This all does come back to ownership. You're absolutely right. But you can focus on the blame and what got them here, or you can focus on how they're getting better, how they're trying to climb out of this, how they are opening an academy in the Dominican to create a stronger footprint on the international scene. And we're seeing that. I mean, they had a couple 7-figure signings this past offseason. In fact, you talk to some people in the industry, the Baseball America types and people that really follow this really, really closely. Some people would say the Orioles are actually a little bit ahead of the game as it speaks to the international market, considering how they 100% neglected that for so long. But that takes time. You don't just say we're going to spend on the international market and suddenly the next Vladimir Guerrero just drops into your laps. So
where most of these franchises have had 2 generations of scouts on the floor there.
And anyone would tell you so many of those signings start at age 15 or 16 for these kids. That they know teams. And look, there's plenty of
12-year-old out there growing up wanting to be Cal Ripken right now.
Not right now.
They're not thinking I want to be an audio. They're thinking I want to be a Yankee. So that's the way it works.
But if you start having boots on the ground there and you have an academy there, that's when things start to change. You start to make they look at that cartoon bird on the cap from their scouts and their people down in the Dominican or wherever it might be, and they say, they've been around, they've been watching me, and so again, that's the part of it that is more the long term. You're talking 5, 6, 7 years down the road. Now, that's not the end all be all. They've drafted. They have Hadley Rutschman, they have DL Hall, they have Grayson Rodriguez. I mean, go down the list. We know the names. And I mean, Brian Mountcastle's here now. Dean Kramer's here now.
When can I go watch a game in Bowie?
Well, the minor leagues are at this point supposed to start. AAA is supposed to start in early May. The rest of the minors is supposed to be a little bit later in the summer. So as far as attendance, I assume it's going to be like we're kind of waiting on everything else in terms of, especially outdoor activities.
And Aberdeen's still short season, even though they've moved sort of like they're up a level. No,
Aberdeen is basically Frederick now. Frederick is no.
So they're going to play. They're going to play earlier, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're going to have they're considered now the high single A. Delmarva is still their lower single A. So they have 4 full season teams. Of course, they still have Gulf Coast. They have the Dominican Summer League teams for their really young prospects. But that's what's been kind of strange through all this. I mean, the minor league baseball discussion and the consolidation in Major League Baseball taking over. I mean, that was something that had been talked about and anticipated before the pandemic, and obviously the impact that the pandemic's had on minor league baseball. It's something that we still haven't really seen. I think just like other elements of the pandemic, as far as economic impact and businesses impacted, I think there's still so much unknown, even as we're
we're going to talk about that next when the draft, right? We're going to talk about that with college basketball and the NBA draft, hockey. I mean, on and on and on, right? We watched the Masters this weekend. Felt a little bit normal, right, for the most part. I mean, great champion, Japan, love Japan. But I would say for all of these sports, the upheaval of the pandemic, the fallout doesn't just begin with the Orioles having guys that can't perform a rundown or how many outs there are. I mean, it goes all the way down, and it'll affect all these organizations for years to come. I mean, certainly the NFL and the draft this year is much more of a crapshoot, right? Like way much more than watching these kids play 10, 12 games last year and having it be evaluated the way that all the evaluators have evaluated it?
Well, you just mentioned it. There are kids who didn't play 10, 12 games last year. I mean, Micah Parsons from Penn State opted out. I mean, he's a guy who's considered a top 10 kind of talent. You have guys who played 7 games last year. I mean,
that's going to be its own.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
baseball free-for-all is, hey, if you've been asleep, Aberdeen's going to have better baseball this year. Frederick's not going to have any, right?
Yeah, I mean, Frederick has, kind of a college, there's a tie-in. They have kind of a short summer draft league. I can't remember the official name. I mean, they have something, but
something.
it's along those lines, and it's disappointing. I've been out to Frederick in fact, I think it was Manny Machado's second game at Frederick way back when. So it was pretty cool. So I was disappointed for them.
Jeff Hammond's run around out there and BJ Surhoff do a rehab. And
I saw Jeffrey Hammonds play for Bowie when they were at Memorial Stadium. Remember they played at the old stadium for
Messina
a year.
Pitched for Bowie on a comeback game too once. Mike.
Yeah.
At Memorial Stadium. I remember that.
Yes. So I mean, look, this is painful right now. I've said this over and over. I mean, I think when you think about the idea of rebuilding, when you're talking about where the Orioles were in 2017, 2018, you kind of romanticize it, right? You're going to trade off, get these young pieces. These young kids are going to come and be juggernauts. And in 2 years, you're going to be competing for a World Series. It's rough and it's ugly. And there are lots of nights you're not going to feel compelled to watch when Jorge Lopez is on the mound. No disrespect to him, but the numbers are what the numbers are. But you look for those little victories when Ryan Mountcastle starts swinging the bat better, and he will. You look at Cedric Mullins doing what he's done so far. You see Bruce Zimmerman pitching in front of 50 of his friends and family on Saturday night.
The story's the best story. I mean, we could sit here and talk all day about that and how cool
Mullins has been too. I mean, Mullins, considering where he was 2 years ago, a guy who fell all the way to Double-A, and now he's been their best player. He's not going to hit 450, but he's looking like a guy who's an everyday player, especially the way he defends. So you look for those little things. And by the way, Trey Mancini hitting a home run on Saturday night, first time since September of 2019. Let's not lose sight of there are some things to like about this team. There are a lot of things to not like, and I get that, especially trying to watch it every night for 6 months. But you try to look at those individual successes, those individual stories, and there'll be more young players coming over the course of the season. Yusniel Diaz and some of the young pitchers I mentioned, we'll see those guys. So,
this is good. The Mariners are here, right? I'm looking down on the schedule. I have to figure it all out. Mariners first up here, and then what happens? Then we go to Texas this weekend, right? We get to play in the new place where all the fans come and breathe on each other and spread germs.
Right. So, but part of it is you get out of the AL East, and we know that the AL East is tough. I mean, even the Red Sox, who aren't as good as the other teams in the AL East, we think, well, they've won 6. They won 6 in a row after the Orioles swept them, and maybe they're not so bad. So, Orioles get a chance to get out of AL East play a little bit, which is typically a good thing, and it feels like it will be again this year.
You want to feel good about your history when it sucks. Hang on with the Mariners a little while, and you feel like we're doing something.
That's
around
true,
here, right? I got friends that are Mariners fans.
That's
Boy,
true.
they've suffered. They have suffered. Maury Brown, you've suffered. All right, Luke Jones. You can find him at Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Facebook and everywhere the internet is served. Of course, I'm wearing my Chicken Palooza. This is the 2020. I was debating the 2019 is green, and I'm going to have a green screen, so I'm not going to be able to wear it anymore, so I better get it in this week. But big appreciation to all our friends at Royal Farms who bailed me out with gas this week, bailed me out with chicken when I was hungry over the weekend, and I needed milk on Monday morning, and I ran off down to the Key Highway. That's sort of, my Royal Farms is the Key Highway location. Like fried chicken down there too, especially the tenders. Had some Western fries last month too. All right, we are making me hungry for coffee and stuff and Justin Tucker's field goal. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking fried chicken and Baltimore positive.